Duke fans, hello and welcome to episode number 228 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Welcome to Labor Day weekend. We are jump-starting this holiday with a very special interview today. Before we introduce our guests, I'm Donald Wine, the host for this week. I am back in DC where we should have wonderful weather this weekend. Also joining me, we have Sam Klein up in Boston. Sam, hello.
Hello, Donald. Nice to hear that you're back in DC. The AC is out in my apartment. It's about 85 degrees in here, so I am dying, and also excited to get to our guest today because we have a lot of interesting stuff we want to talk about.
Absolutely. And before we bring him in, still enjoying life on the Jersey Shore, it seems, is Jason Evans. Hello, Jason.
Yeah, for Labor Day, I'm going to be coming back to Atlanta. So I'll be driving through Durham. If you lean out your window and wave, you'll be able to see me, people. But this is the end of my vacation. But enough about me. Let's talk to our guest.
Absolutely. As I mentioned at the top, we have a very special guest with us today. We are pleased to be joined by the Director of Broadcasting for Duke Athletics. He has been the play-by-play announcer for Duke basketball and Duke football since June of 2017. And you know him as the voice of the Blue Devils, David Shumate. Hello to you and welcome to the DBR podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I don't want to hear anything about heat. The heat indexes here in Durham have been like 110 all week. And you guys are talking about 85, and you're worried about that. I can't breathe when I walk outside.
I was very recently in Durham just a couple months ago, so I know what it's like. It's the shock of thinking that you're in an air conditioned building and then slowly realizing that you're not as the sun comes up in the morning. So I do need to defend myself a little bit.
I will mention, David, that I spent the last month in Texas where the real temp was 110. So coming back to DC where it's normally 115 heat index and right now it's like 90 feels absolutely cold to me, which is great. But anyway, it's good. We're glad to have you on since we are just a week away from the beginning of the football season. We're going to start with some football and Sam is going to kick us off with some questions about David Cutcliffe's bunch. Sam?
All right, David. So we have, I think on our show, we've kind of been maybe denying that football season is coming because we've been so skeptical for so long that the ACC and Duke is actually going to pull it off. So I wanted to start kind of with you. What has the process been for you to, one, get back on campus and two, get integrated back with the various teams? Because a big part of your job during the week when you're not calling the games is actually interacting with all the coaches and the players to get to know them so that you have stuff to talk about during the game. So what has that reintegration been like?
It's been strange in some ways. Like if you look at the big picture, it's in some ways been the longest summer since I've been here, but in other ways, it feels like the summer didn't happen because everyone spent so much time indoors the first few months when we were dealing with this. And then you kind of start to peek your head out the door and then you gradually get more comfortable doing different stuff. And obviously, the team got back a couple of months ago, and then, Bob Wiseman is the guy on campus who's kind of headed up all the integration protocols of who can come back and when they can come back and what access you'll have. And I've been allowed to go to practice since they started, working outside and the team collective stuff. Obviously, you're masked up, you're 6 feet, you're staying well away from the players and things like that. But I'm not back on campus. I'm working from home. Mainly just go over there if I need to grab an interview or if I go to practice or if I need to get something with Coach Cut. But it's different, but it's similar, if that makes sense. We're doing all the same stuff, but I would imagine similar to you guys, we're doing it in ways we never thought we'd ever be doing it. I mean, I'm out of practice with a 10-foot pole doing interviews to make sure I'm staying away from guys. It's different, but hopefully on the back end when people are listening or watching stuff, it doesn't feel that different to them.
I want to talk a little bit about individual football personnel because I guess we have the opening game is coming up next weekend against Notre Dame. I think the player that Duke fans are probably most interested in is their new quarterback transfer, Chase Bryce, who of course came from Clemson, where he spent a lot of time on the sideline watching, big championship teams perform at a very high level. What has it been like for him coming onto campus during all of this? And what do you feel are the expectations for him coming into a season that had a strange offseason for him to get integrated and get to know the rest of the team?
I think the most interesting thing to watch with Chase has been obviously not being able to be here in person in the spring because of the pandemic was challenging, not having that face-to-face communication. They were able to do stuff over the phone, do stuff over Zoom, but to get on the field, and get to know the guys. I mean, I think so much of what's going to work for the passing game this year, now it hasn't been officially named, but if Chase is named the starter, will be his relationship with those wideouts and what he can do to make this offense go. And Chris Katrinick and Gunnar Holmberg are the other two guys in the mix for that competition. And they've kind of been working through some similar stuff. But the thing that has impressed me most in watching with Chase, and maybe it shouldn't be that shocking coming from Clemson, and you mentioned the national championship pedigree, he's got no fear. He's got so much confidence in what he goes about doing, and you can see that oozes out of him. So, while he's got to learn a new system, while he's got to learn everything Coach Cutt wants from him in terms of lining up the protections and things he puts on the quarterback, you can tell he's not a guy that's going to tiptoe into this. He's going to splash into the pool, and that's fun to watch because you can see some of the raw talent and the plays he can make.
Duke recently lost starting center Jack Wollabaugh, who was in line for a lot of preseason accolades and was likely going to have a big season. Who are the other kind of senior leaders that the offense is really leaning on to be there to help Chase Bryce along?
Yeah, it's brutal for Jack, right? I mean, here's a guy that was clearly going to be the leader along the offensive line. But, and Dave Harding, who I do the games with, and I were talking about this the other day, you never want to see injuries, but even before this was going to be the deepest offensive line. Dave even thought maybe deeper than his 2013 Coastal Division Championship team that David Cutcliffe has had here. So they have some bodies to work with. Will Taylor is going to step into that starting role at center. He got some experience last year when Jack had an ankle injury. But they do have a bunch of different guys. Devery Hamilton is a transfer that came in from Stanford, is going to play tackle. Jacob Monk is moving inside for guard. But there's different wrinkles in there. And I look at a guy like, yes, he's just a sophomore, but Casey Holman is a guy that I could see easily becoming a leader amongst this group. You don't always have to go to the older guys. He's just got the personality and the mentality of what it takes to succeed along the offensive line in my conversations with him. So I would look at Casey Holman, who's likely going to be the starter at right tackle. That would be the person that I would look at.
And then on the defensive side, I think the most interesting player for Duke is the return of Mark Gilbert, who was a stalwart defensive back, has missed a lot of time due to injuries. But we finally hope that he is healthy and ready to play. What have you heard from him and the rest of the defensive backs, which have been probably one of the best positional groups for Duke the last few years?
He looks great. I mean, seeing him in practice, and it's funny, 2 years ago, he was a preseason All-American candidate. And I think if in some ways someone can be forgotten, I think he has kind of been forgotten in the build-up to the season because of the 2 years he missed. Essentially, 2 games, I guess. He played Army and then Northwestern and then had the dislocated hip. But he's been out for 2 years, and I think people have forgotten how good he can be out there at corner. And it's not just winning his matchups. And I talk about with Matt Guerreri about this, the co-defensive coordinator who heads up the secondary. It's what you can do with the rest of your defense, because now you've got a lockdown corner and it kind of shuts down one side of the field, and you can't throw to that side of the field. You can rotate your protections how you want to, but you can also, get after the quarterback a little more. And I think, what Duke has along the defensive line is equally impressive to Mark Gilbert. When you look at Victor Dimukeji and Chris Rumpf, who's gotten so much attention from Pro Football Focus over the summer as a potential pro prospect and one of the best edge rushers coming back in the country. I think the fact that you've got Gilbert out there as a lockdown corner, it might bear itself out, surprisingly enough, in higher sack numbers, if that makes sense, because the quarterback's not going to have any easy throws.
And then looking ahead at this opening game, because of the retooled schedule due to COVID, Duke opens with Notre Dame. This is now the second year in a row that Duke has, instead of, I think usually Duke has a somewhat easier opponent to start the season. Now this is the second year in a row where Duke has had a really strong opponent, last year, of course, being Alabama, and then this year Notre Dame. How does the team look ahead to the season knowing that their first game is also against one of their toughest opponents? And what do you expect to see from Duke in that opening matchup?
Yeah, you think he should have like a college football playoff T-shirt or something, because he's played just about everybody that's been in it. Clemson a couple years ago, Alabama, and Notre Dame. And it's strange, right? It's not just the factor that it's going to be Notre Dame. They're letting 20% of the people in there, so that's going to be strange. You're going to this iconic building to play a game, but it's going to have a weird feel to it. I don't think anyone would deny that. It's also a conference game, so you got to get your head wrapped around that. There's no longer divisions, so you have to, kind of be in that horse race right from the beginning if you're going to get a chance to get to Charlotte. So there's all the different pieces that go into it. I will say that I bet Brian Kelly is as stressed as anybody, though, because, we haven't mentioned this specifically yet. You guys probably talked about it. David Cutcliffe's calling the plays this year. So while the entire offensive coaching staff is the same, he doesn't know what it's going to look like with Cutcliffe actually pulling the strings and calling the plays, and how this offense might be a little different. So you go into it blind to some extent in terms of what Notre Dame's going to have. Everyone talks about their offensive line is going to be really good. Ian Book obviously is incredibly talented. But that goes both ways because they don't really know what Duke's going to look like. We've talked about the quarterback competition, Cutcliffe calling the plays, and what this defense will look like with all the different weapons that McArary and Ben Albert have to play with now.
David, I want to shift gears to basketball, and we'll get into the prep and how you balance these two teams at this period of time in a little bit. But with regards to basketball, you've gotten to probably see and talk to some of the players and some of the coaches. What have you been hearing about the summer workouts and who has been excelling and guys that have been kind of coming along faster than expected?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because basketball is in such a different place than football. They've been doing mostly individual workouts, and because they have more time until their season begins. And I think, Coach K and his group have done a very cautious approach in how they're getting into this and being as safe as possible. I haven't had a chance to go over there and see a specific workout yet because, kind of like I was telling you guys with football, I'm going to go over there once the season begins. There's no reason to do stuff when you don't need to. But the guy that you keep hearing about, really there's two guys, Jeremy Roach and Jalen Johnson. I mean, these two guys are going to be elite contributors. And then, it's funny because every time I talk, everyone wants to talk about the new guys, right? And the freshman class. And I think sometimes that can be the only guys that we pay attention to, and you forget about some of the returners. And I look at a guy like Wendell Moore Jr. going to have a big year this year, and the way he's going to fit into what they're going to do with so many different guys that can contribute. I mean, I think this team is going to look a lot more like last year than maybe 2 years ago. I think 2 years ago when you had Zion in that crew, you kind of had your 5 or 6 guys. And last year, the conversation was always, 9, 10, 11. And, here comes J-Rob, the NC State and Carolina games, the last 2 games of the season, exploding onto the scene. I think that this year is going to have that similar feel. I just see 9, 10 guys that can get in and play. There's not this huge differential between the starting 5 and the rest of the guys on the team that there maybe was a couple years ago.
And right now, you have, I mean, really all the time, you have the best seat in the house when it comes to watching basketball in Cameron Indoor Stadium. What players are you looking forward to watching from that view? Or is there a season where you walk in saying, man, I can't wait to see this guy play?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk like in retrospect, I mean, I think one of the more fun guys to watch, Zion was obviously incredible, and he was on his own level. But in my time here, Cassius Stanley, because of the slender build and the way he could get up, and the view you have from up top, when you're down low, you get a good feel for how high guys can jump. But when you're up top, you have a better spatial perspective of how far he's coming from, and he literally looks like he's flying. And he was just a blast to watch him play. Because as you mentioned, we're up it's called the Crow's Nest, but we're kind of on top of the building in Cameron, and it's the best view to watch a game from. This year, I'm interested to watch Roach because the last couple of years has just been a masterclass in watching Trey Jones run the floor, what he can do defensively, what he can do at the point. And I'm interested to see how Jeremy does that as well, and how he can run things, because that is the other really huge advantage, or the treat, I would say, from being up top, is you can really see how point guards are running their team and who's in control of the team, and how much is the coach driving the bus versus the player on the floor that's in control. So that's one of the guys I'm really interested to see.
One last question on basketball, and I'm just curious, last year you mentioned J-Rob and just his emergence, and I can tell from when we listen to your broadcast, when I get the opportunity to here in DC, that you have an extra bit of passion when you're calling a 3-pointer by him or a dunk or a good stop by him. Is there someone this year where you're like, man, if this guy could get on the floor and kind of do that sort of revelation in the form of J-Rob, that's going to be the X factor of the season? There's one guy that you're just pulling for in a sense?
I don't know if pulling for, but the thing about J Rob is like, because and you guys talk about this. I'm at practice a lot, and you see what the other guys around the team are like, and you get to see some of these guys' stories. And J Rob is not dissimilar from, I guess it was 2 years ago now when Jack White had that awful streak where he couldn't, make a three if there was a pool out there on the floor. It just would not go in for him. And you see the place explode when he hit that three late in the year. I think it was against Miami.
We were there.
At that game.
We were all there.
We were at that game. It was great.
Yeah, but that's the kind of stuff that I get excited for. So, if I'm looking at a guy coming into this year, I think Matthew Hurt might be someone that's going to be interesting for me to watch. Incredibly talented, really highly recruited, and I think through his freshman year had to work through some things. I mean, we saw the flashes of what he could be in terms of a score, and he contributed consistently all along. Don't get me wrong, but here's a guy who has had to work for it a little bit, and I'm interested to see what he does in his sophomore season. So those are kind of the cool moments, and some of losing it with J. Rob, and I think about that NC State game with Cassius Stanley's ridiculous dunks, where I clearly went over the top. But like, part of it's the ebb and flow of the season. I mean, you got to remember that was coming off of, not a great performance against Wake Forest, playing pretty well at Virginia, but not getting a win. So you're kind of trying to tell the story of the season. And when J. Rob is hitting those shots or Cassius is doing those dunks, to me, I could feel the weight being lifted off these guys' shoulders that was kind of starting to build of the expectations and, oh no, is it falling apart here down the stretch? And that's kind of what I'm trying to convey is maybe not so much, in the arc of the history of the program, is this some miraculous play? No, but for this team and this season, those were kind of defining moments. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get across.
Okay, so you've talked a little bit about football. You've talked a little bit about basketball. I want to talk a little bit about David and being a play-by-play guy, because let's be honest, all of us think you have the dream job. We all want that job. How did this happen for you? How did you become the voice of the Blue Devils?
Sure. Well, for those that don't know, I went to college at Appalachian State. I did study broadcasting. Some might disagree after they listen to me, but I got into it. Did the women's games at App my last couple of years, and like everyone, I thought I was, the hottest thing, and got out and realized, as you guys know, anyone in this business knows, there's a million people who want to do it and not many jobs out there. So I had a little bit of an adventure right out of college. I dipped my toe in law school, kicked around for a little bit, decided that wasn't for me. My parents weren't thrilled, but, you figure it out, and got on with a broadcasting company. The way the college space works, there's companies that kind of purchase the rights to broadcast the games, not dissimilar from what ESPN does. And that company was ISP, and it's actually flipped over several times now. It's the same company I work for now, Learfield IMG College, and got a chance to do some studio work. Got a chance to do some fill-in play-by-play at a bunch of different colleges over the course of a 4 or 5 year period. While my day job was managing broadcasts all across the country. And then got a chance, as I got deeper into do some of their national programming. And one of the schools I got a chance to fill in for was Duke. Got a chance when Bob had football, basketball conflicts. I came over here and helped out and got to know guys like John Jackson. Got to meet Coach when I was doing those games, worked with John Roth, who I call the games with now, and got to know a lot of the people on campus, and just love my time with them and being around the program. It's special from an on-court standpoint, but to get to know those people, I knew it was a great fit for me. And then you throw your name in your hat and you hope you get lucky. And something they liked in me, I don't know, you'd have to ask them what they saw, but that was kind of the path working through that. So it's like everyone in this business, I think it's a 10 to 15 year journey to get here. And I boiled it down to 30 seconds because I don't want to bore people, but it was kind of how it worked out.
Hey, just talking about the logistics of games this year, this coming year, where things are going to be very different than they've ever been in our past. Have you thought about how it's going to affect your call? That you'll have, you talked about the Notre Dame game, 20% of the fans. It is entirely possible you will call games where there will be 0 fans there. Talk about how that may be affecting your preparation or how you think it'll impact your call, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think, and Dave and I have talked about this on the football side of things. No one's naive to what's going on in our country, whether it be the pandemic, social injustice, what's going on with these players finding their voice over the summer and everything that goes with that. And I think, and I don't know if I'm dovetailing off what you talked about here, but I think this is all a part of it because I think this is a unique year and how we're presenting this and how we have to present these guys' stories. And I think that's going to be a big part of what we do. But I also believe that what we're doing is to give people a little slice of normalcy and to try to have some fun with it. Because at the end of the day, that's what sports are, a chance to have some fun. So I think we're going to try to keep it loose, try to keep it more conversational, maybe not as dramatic as you might call a game when there's 100,000 people in the building, because I think that might be disjointed from what people are hearing. But to kind of bring people in and say, let's have fun for a few hours and see where this goes. And obviously present it professionally, present it seriously, but to try to just have some fun and give people a little bit of release and tell the stories of these kids, because it's amazing we've gotten here. Duke has gone several weeks now without a positive test, and I'm knocking on wood as I do it. But these guys have put in so much work and been so disciplined in what they're doing and living at the Washington Duke Hotel and going to practice and doing their schoolwork. It's incredible. And I think it's an awesome opportunity, and I think we need to tell their story of what they're doing behind the scenes to make this work and how important it is to them as much as anything.
That is a great sentiment. So you're talking about telling stories. As we wrap up, because we're almost done and we appreciate your time so much, it's time for you to tell me a good, funny story. I want to hear give me something crazy that happened during like a broadcast at some point, or like some interesting interaction you had with Coach K or Coach Cutcliffe. Take us behind the curtain a little bit with a good story that has not otherwise been revealed.
No, I'll give you one of each of those guys, and give you one calling a game that was actually pretty recent. So when I was going through the interview process with Coach Cut, cool. I mean, to give you a sense of what this guy is and how much he cares about people and how much he cares about broadcasting, when I talked with him and did the interview, it was very much a conversation, but he obviously has roots at Tennessee and the SEC and everything he's done, and he had queued up on his phone a Kenny Chesney song that he'd written for John Ward at Tennessee. And he's like, I want to play this for you, and I want you to know that you need to have this connection with our fans. And that was kind of what kickstarted the conversation. And it was like, good Lord. I mean, this guy, of everything he's got going on in terms of getting ready for a season, that he had that level of detail and was ready to do that was kind of crazy. Coach K, so I told you I filled in for Bob a couple of times. So the first game I did, for whatever reason, normally I don't go back and interview Coach after the game. Roth would do that because I host the post-game show. But I think it was a day where we were bleeding into a football broadcast. For whatever reason, I was going back to interview Coach after I called the game post-game. And I want to say we're playing Rhode Island. Don't quote me on that. But I went back. This was in that tournament that's played up in the Northeast. And I went back, and it was a close game. The team had played okay, but not great. And you go into this small room where the coaches meet post-game before they go talk to the team, and it's all the assistants. Mickey's in there, and Coach is not exactly thrilled, and he's saying his piece and doing all this stuff. And he whips to me, and he goes, "You ready?" And I've got like 2 seconds to start talking to him in a space that's like 4x6 with 7 people staring at you. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to go. We're not even going to – just going to leave this. But to be in that space with Coach was cool. I mean, we got the interview done, but it's like, holy crap, I'm sitting here across from the guy who's best who's ever done it. He's hot, not happy with the way they played, and now I've got to ask him 4 inane basketball questions and hope I don't get punched in the face. But that was cool.
I will tell you that I've done a couple prickly Coach K interviews in my time. They are not fun.
No, but from a pure broadcasting standpoint, last year in the Carolina game, I lost my voice for about 5 seconds. I thought I wasn't going to be able to finish the second half. I had a little bit of a cold going on and went for a call and just lost my voice. Roth covered for me. I coughed a little bit and figured it out, but that is like the total disaster scenario if you're in the middle of calling a game and your voice is totally gone. But those are just a couple, but I don't know if that's what you're looking for or not. But these guys are great. They're fun to work with, but you haven't lived until you're 3 or 4 inches away from Coach K's face after he's not super thrilled with the performance.
Absolutely. David Shumate, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We're looking forward to hearing your voice calling all the action this year, beginning with, as you said, the Notre Dame game next weekend and throughout the football and basketball seasons. And best of luck with everything. I know it's going to be a weird year of sorts, a weird season for both football and basketball, but we are going to be able to listen to you for a lot of it. So we hope to have you back on in the future, but best of luck with everything moving forward.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.
And that was David Shumate, the voice of the Blue Devils. He talked to us about football, basketball, and just what goes into preparation for each game and each season. Sam, what did you think of David and his thoughts on the teams that we love to watch?
I think this is the first time this year that we're seriously just talking about the football team and as if things were going back to normal. So I think it took me realizing that we were having him on this week to be like, you know what, we should probably be previewing the football team. We should probably be talking about the season that's coming up. I've been so pessimistic that any of this is, one, going to work, and two, is right, that I haven't really gotten my head around the fact that they're actually going to play games. So it was good to talk to him just about regular football stuff, to ask him questions about Chase Bryce and Mark Gilbert and all of those guys. I'm glad that he brought up Chris Rumph. There are so many interesting players for Duke this year, and I think that it is, to get into that a little bit. Last year, as we talked about, I think a lot, it was a little bit of a transition year. Duke had obviously lost Daniel Jones. The defense was still very good. Duke's secondary in particular was great at stopping the big play, but the team never quite put it together, especially against good competition, which is why they weren't able to get to a bowl game. But this season, even with a transfer quarterback in Chase Bryce and two younger guys who have a little bit of experience, but not that much, that position is still kind of inexperienced relative to, as David mentioned, the offensive line. Said that the defensive secondary and the defensive line both really strong for Duke. But I think we expect the team to be a lot better this year. Now, does that mean Duke is going to win 5 or 6 games? Well, Duke plays 2 fewer games than they normally would. They're down to 10 games in the season, and the schedule is a lot harder. The easiest game that Duke gets to play is against easy ACC opponents, not easy opponents who don't get to make bowl games, who are in that second tier of Division I. And as we talked about, we start off right off the bat with Notre Dame. Last year, Duke had that opening matchup against Alabama that a couple of us were at, and Duke got totally walloped in that game, but managed to recover from it. Is Duke going to be able to do the same against Notre Dame? I don't think we want to come in here and predict that Duke is going to be able to beat the Irish in that opening matchup. So can Duke bounce back from that game and go right into the Boston College game and be back to normal so that they can get those 4 or 5 wins? I don't know exactly what the bowls are going to do this year, given that schedules are smaller and all of that. But can Duke get to 4, 5, 6 wins this year, given that there are still some transitions that they're making, and the fact that the most important position on the field, the quarterback, is likely going to be manned by a guy who, as David was talking about, wasn't really able to be on campus in the spring, given the pandemic, to get to know the rest of his offensive unit, get to know Coach Cutcliffe in person a little bit more, and work with him in person. A lot of that was being done virtually. So I think you're going to hear a lot more about that as the season goes on. Hopefully, you tune into these Duke broadcasts, and David Shumate will tell you about the conversations he's having with those guys and how challenging it is to get up to speed. But I was really interested to hear his thoughts on the whole football team. I'll give it back to you, Donald, to talk a little bit about basketball, although I'm not sure, the football season starting just a little bit late. We have no idea when the basketball season is going to start. So not sure when we need to get into the nuts and bolts of the basketball team for this year.
Yeah, I mean, the basketball part we'll get to in just a second. I know for football, you were talking about some of the teams that we play. We do play Charlotte. I wouldn't call that the lesser second tier team that we're
Right.
used to playing, but it's definitely a game that I would consider winnable on this schedule.
But I'd forgotten that the ACC was letting all the teams take one extra non-conference opponent. So we picked up UNC Charlotte, who I think is a little bit better than a lot of the teams that we normally play in those slots. I mean, Duke does not, save for that Alabama game, Duke does not usually schedule up in those out of conference games. Duke is looking for easy wins, which is which is no fault of the program, but they want to get to bowl games. It's easier to get to bowl games if you play easier teams in those non-conference games.
And the bottom line is that Sam is absolutely right that the schedule, as a result of it being 90% conference games, only one non-conference game, the schedule is significantly harder this year than what we've seen in years past.
Every game counts, but I will say this: I know we got mollywopped by Notre Dame last year, but the last time we went to South Bend, we won. So I'm going to hold out some reservations, some hope. And it's 2020. Like literally everything has happened. So why not go to Notre Dame and just beat the snot out of them? It'd be great.
Yeah, but this time I won't be there to make sure that it happens.
That's true.
As you guys remember, I was at that game last time. So one of the coolest sporting events that I've ever been to was Duke beating Notre Dame in South Bend.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens there. But you talked about how for a minute we were able to just talk about football and talk about basketball as if nothing was happening. And I do actually appreciate that David mentioned that they are preparing with the world in mind, that he's approaching this saying, hey, there are things going on outside of this here bubble that they've created at Duke that are affecting these players, affecting how we view the game. And he's bringing that approach to how he calls the game. And I think that was a great question, Jason, that led to him kind of explaining how he's going about all that, because the preparation for these guys this year is going to be, normally the logistics are crazy. We talk about how, he talked about how from football to basketball and just how those kind of intertwine with each other, especially in November when we are at Duke. We've had games where the football team was playing at 12 and the basketball team was playing at 3. And you're like, there's no way that these guys are, preparing for both games the same day. But at the same time, with this new world and this changing environment, and really, yeah, sure, we have a game scheduled for next weekend, but for all intents and purposes, we won't know until it's being played, until it plays. And that preparation has got to be nerve-wracking to, do all that. But I appreciated how he's talking about approaching it, and also just saying, hey, for 3 hours, this can be a release for everyone, where they can just focus on hearing the call and hoping Duke wins on a week-by-week basis. So I did appreciate what he's going through as far as from a logistical standpoint and how he's working with the coaches to make that happen.
And I loved when he talked about the effort that Duke and the players are putting in to making sure that they are safe, that there's no corona. He talked about they've been testing and they haven't found any cases among the athletes. I hope that other schools are taking it as seriously and doing as much as they can the way Duke is. I've been we've all been tracking the numbers and talking about them. Duke has done a really, really admirable job. And it makes me excited, as versus being really scared about what's going to happen once we start actually playing games, in football starting in just, we're like 10 days away right now, less than that. And basketball, somewhere beyond that. The only other thing I wanted to add about what David Shumate had to talk to us about was in basketball. I was surprised when he said, hey, everybody's talking about 2 guys. I did not think Jeremy Roach was going to be one of those 2 guys. Now, I'm not saying, there's high expectations for Jeremy Roach. And a lot of people think he's, probably the second best guy in this freshman class after Jalen Johnson. And everyone knows Jalen Johnson, absolute stud, future lottery pick. We got that. When he said 2 guys, I thought he was going to mention DJ Stewart, because I've heard a lot of people talking about how impressed they have been with DJ Stewart's shooting ability. For him to say that Jeremy Roach is the guy that's really impressing him gets me even more excited for the regular season, because we've heard about, like I say, I've heard about DJ Stewart. I've heard about, Mark Williams being just a ridiculous athlete for a guy his size and his length. But to hear that Jeremy Roach is the guy that's impressing everybody, give me some basketball. And I'm really, really gung ho now for basketball to start at some point.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Jeremy Roach, and I'm glad he actually did mention it, because and I don't know if this is because I live in the DC area and I get a lot of the news about guys from the DC area, and since Jeremy's from here, but they've been talking a lot about how he is just the guy who's like, I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to let my play do the talking, and his play is speaking volumes, because up here they are talking about Jeremy Roach up here, there's no competition for the starting job. It's his. And that's something that was, so when he said that, I was like, oh, that really lines up with what I'm hearing. But I'm glad that someone in Durham is also hearing that and quote unquote seeing that, because I just thought it was something that the DC media is like, hey, hype the DC kid. But when it comes to Jeremy Roach and DJ Stewart, if both of them, I see there's going to be opportunities where both of them may be on the floor at times as Coach K tries to figure out what the rotations are going to be. We'll talk about basketball a little bit later down the line, but I think when it comes to Jeremy Roach, he is very interesting because if he's starting and he's everything that everyone is saying about him, then this team can go really far this year. But coming up, we are going to discuss what Coach K said just a day or so ago about the NCAA tournament. Are we talking about expansion? Find out after this break. We are back here on the DBR podcast. And as I mentioned before the break, Coach K had some curious comments about the NCAA tournament and what he thinks should happen this year. And I'm going to give it to Jason because Jason has the skinny on what Coach K said and what it could mean for the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, so Coach K just a couple of days ago was talking, he was doing an interview on the ACC network, the Packer and Durham show, I believe. And they were talking about, the college basketball season and what kind of form and what kind of shape it takes and things like that. And everyone agrees that it's going to be unusual. And I'm going to get more into some of the talk about what it's going to be like in just a minute. But Coach K said, look, if this is going to be this crazy, if we're going to, potentially only conference games or a lot of conference games and not many non-conference games. He said, I really think that they should look at expanding the NCAA tournament to 128 teams, double the size. And he said the reason you would do that is you would invite every single Power 5 team plus the Big East. The Power 5 plus the Big East, the 6 major conferences in college basketball. He said you should just invite every single one of those teams because that's the fairest thing to do. And you'd also, obviously, even inviting those teams, you would have room for plenty of at-large bids for teams from mid-major conferences and the such. He said go to 128. It's just one extra game. It's a lot more teams, but it's one extra game. But he put out there that this notion that in this crazy time, trying to figure out, among teams that largely play conference schedules, that he thinks you should just invite entire conferences, all 6 of the major conferences, which is like, wow. I regret I have not looked at the numbers to see how many teams there are in those 6 conferences to see how many, of those 128 slots you would fill up. But it's a really interesting idea from Coach K. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, there has been more and more talk. We are getting closer and closer to the NCAA actually announcing how they're going to handle the season. And we expect in the next 10 days or so, the NCAA is going to make an announcement about when college basketball will begin. All the reports are indicating that they're looking at either November 28th or December 4th. That those are the 2 dates they're looking at to start the season. Now, this is about a month later than what I think they were originally looking, at like the first week of November starting the season. Well, now they're talking about November 28th or December 4th. Those are the 2 major dates. And, by the way, it's worth noting both of those are after Thanksgiving. It's unclear how they would deal with like Christmas and New Year's because players are probably going to go home. I've heard a lot of talk. I think what makes the most sense, what's probably going to happen is you're going to see teams forming bubbles in the month of December. You may even see like 2 sets of bubbles in the month of September for major conference teams where, let's say Duke and Michigan State and Tennessee will get together with like 3 other smaller mid-major kind of teams. They'll play a little round. They'll get it in a bubble. They'll play a little round robin thing over the course of a week or 2 weeks. You get 5 or 6 games that way. Then you do another one. Like, maybe it's Duke and UCLA and Texas and 3 smaller teams. You play another mini bubble. So you get like 10 non-conference games during the month of December in like a couple of these little bubble kind of things. And then once you hit January, mid-January probably, once guys have come back from the Christmas break, you've done a lot of testing, everything's under control, then you go into a conference bubble and you play all conference games from mid-January to the end of February, and then you begin the NCAA tournament. That's what I'm hearing a lot of talk, that's the kind of thing that they're going to try and do. I think it's a really interesting idea. And then it would culminate in an NCAA tournament still during March, which Coach K thinks should have 128 teams in it. Guys, what do you think about that?
So first of all, I really feel bad for Seth Greenberg, because I feel like if he was still coaching, he would relish this opportunity to find a way for Virginia Tech to be on the outside looking in as the 129th team. I'm really upset.
There's no bubble.
For him. Well,
right, there's no bubble, but Virginia Tech is still on the bubble.
He would find it. I don't care how many teams are in the NCAA tournament. He would find that bubble. He would firmly plant Virginia Tech right on it.
Donald, I am furious that you took my joke directly from me. I was like, what I was going to say is that you know that this is a serious recommendation and not like Coach K. Look, Duke is going to make the NCAA tournament unless something goes dramatically wrong. Duke with this lineup with Wendell Moore and Matthew Hurt and Jordan Goldwire coming back and all these and Joey Baker coming back and all these amazing talented freshmen, Duke is making a 64-team tournament. They would not be on the outside looking in. This is not. I think you could cook up a couple of conspiracy theories about why Coach K is talking about the tournament this way. You know, the power conferences breaking away from the NCAA, et cetera. But being afraid of not making the tournament, that would be some real Seth Greenberg stuff. So if Seth Greenberg was recommending it, you would know that it was coming from a place of like, no, we deserve to be in the tournament. So Donald, I'm very mad at you for taking my joke away from me. I think I like the Seth Greenberg joke more than anybody else. So, but sorry, I interrupted your point for something more important.
No, that's fine. It was a nice tangent that we just had. But when it comes to the tournament, I think the 128 teams, I'll talk about tournament real quick. I think 128 teams would be fine. I just don't know how they're going to do it in the sense that, you know, there's always going to be someone that complains. And I think, you know, when it comes to it, I feel like some people will want to not do it because it will kind of negate the regular season for a lot of teams. Like if every Power 5 team is going to be in it, then why should they be playing? They can play whoever they want and go, you know, 0-16 in conference and they're still in. That probably wouldn't. They'll come up with something that kind of lines up where the regular season still matters somewhat.
Yeah, in the case, seeding would still matter. I mean, look, it's still way advantageous to be a high seed in a scenario like that. In fact, you know, in the old model, if you were a sort of middling seed, you know, you played a pretty tough team. You know, in this scenario, if you don't play well and you're a low seed, you could be playing a really, really good team. So seeding would still matter. So the regular season would still matter in that regard. Yes,
that's true. But, you know, again, there are definitely, and we see this in high school all the time, where some teams will just be like, you know what, we have some injuries. Let's just take it easy. We know we're a good team because in March we'll get all our guys back, and then bam, you release some team on the world, and they destroy everybody on their way to a title. So it can happen. I'm not saying that it's something that all teams are going to be trying to do, but it's something to consider when you think about it. When it comes to the bubbles, I do think the interesting scenario that you did in your kind of example, I think when it comes to the bubbles, I think we will see them, but I think we'll see them more regionalized. I think there may be a couple of, you know, big blue bloods, like, you know, the Champions Classic has been kind of, you know, Coach Cal threw out the possibility of that being a bubble. I could see that happening where those 4 teams play a couple of games against each other and just do that for the first couple of weeks. But I think when it comes to these bubbles, I think we'll see them more regionalized, and those, you know, you'll take 3 of the ACC teams, for example. Let's take the 3 triangle teams in the ACC, and then pair them up with some and then pair them up with, like, you know, some of the lower, like Elons and Charlottes and those type of deals in kind of a bubble, and do it that way. Because I feel like the way that these conferences are going right now, they don't want a lot of teams going very far from their home base.
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to be really quick. I don't think it's going to be conferences. Conference teams that'll team up. It could be regional, but it'll be like, so if it's regional, it's like Duke and South Carolina and I'm trying to think of someone from the Georgetown from the DC area.
Okay, you know, that makes sense. So I agree with that.
That works better. You don't want conference teams because you want to be able to play each other a little bit.
Right. No,
and
that's
conference
fair.
games, they're going to have enough conference games, believe me. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, I think the part that's going to be tricky there is that you have a lot of different stakeholders with different financial incentives. So normally the conferences schedule the conference games, and the teams, like the individual schools, don't have much say in when their games are. Obviously, like the Duke UNC game always ends up at the end of the season. That's kind of as far as we know, that's just sort of a handshake agreement between Duke and UNC and the conference and ESPN. But most of the games are sort of just jumbled up. ESPN tries to time it so that they get good games on marquee nights, so that there's always a couple of good games for Big Monday and Saturday nights and what have you. The challenge in this system is that you're going to have to totally upend the way those negotiations currently work, because you're going to have the conferences agreeing to perhaps split revenue in ways they didn't before for non-conference games. So normally Duke plays Kentucky in a non-conference game. The ACC has nothing to do with that. Duke and Kentucky get that money. When Duke schedules a home game where they buy out some smaller opponent to come in to get their butts kicked in Cameron, Duke pays that team. ESPN pays Duke for the right to televise that, and we're done. Now we're going to probably be having the conferences getting involved in non-conference scheduling, which might be more work than they are willing to do. So you are going to hear, I think, a lot leaking out about the different conferences negotiating with each other, because on top of this, the conferences are currently dealing with the fact that different Power 5 conferences are taking different approaches to the pandemic. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 canceled football. Now, maybe they're regretting it, maybe they're not. But as they're approaching basketball season, are they going to maintain the same protocols that they had in place before? So if you do have a situation like what you guys are talking about, where you get these regional games, all right, well, what if Louisville, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio State get into a bubble together? That would mean, teams from 4 different Power 5 conferences. How are they going to negotiate all of that? Some schools like Nebraska, or maybe not Nebraska because they're closer to Iowa, but some of the more far-flung schools, especially in the Pac-12, don't have necessarily good regional opponents. Who are the Oregon schools going to play that's close to them? Who are the Northern California schools going to play that's close to them? So I think there are a lot of logistics involved in that might make it so challenging that they can't pull it off, or at least not pull it off in a way that's satisfying for a national college basketball season. I think regionally it's going to work, but nationally it may not.
But when it comes to some of these teams, you're talking about the logistics between conferences. The Pac-12 has said they are not playing any sports until January 1st. So
they're starting to walk that back. They're going to start. They're starting to walk it back.
But as of right now, they can't schedule anything with UCLA or USC or Stanford or whoever, because technically they're not allowed to play until January 1st until they say otherwise. So as this goes about, I think this is where Coach K a couple weeks ago was talking about the NCAA needs to show some leadership and show some spine and get everybody into a room and be an adult and say, hey, this is what's going to happen, and this is how you guys need to work with each other, because if you don't work with each other, we're not going to have college basketball.
I'll bring it all full circle to you. I think one of the reasons Coach K is talking about a 128-team tournament and talking about inviting everybody is that the reality is the regular college basketball season is going to be so different for different teams. In the past, we always knew everyone was going to play around 30 games over the course of the season. I think it is entirely possible you're going to see some teams that play 6 games plus a conference schedule, some teams that play 0 non-conference games plus a conference schedule. You're going to see some conferences not be able to put together a full schedule. It is entirely possible that when we come NCAA tournament selection time, there are teams out there that have played only 12 or 14 games and teams that have played 25 or 30 games. A team like Duke that can be on TV all the time and draw a big audience, they're going to try and play as many games as they can. But Austin Peay, for example, I don't know that Austin Peay is going to get more than 10 or 12 games on their season. And Coach K is saying, let's go to 128, because then there's an easy way to, sort of not have to worry about the playing field being completely level for everybody, because the bodies of work are going to seem so different with teams that only played games in the teens and teams that played 10, 12 more games than that.
And we think that for the purposes of seeding the tournament, that we already don't have enough games to decide if Team X is better than Team Y. Now there are going to be maybe half as many games to judge that on. And the games where we really get a lot of that structure in the overall rankings those are the non-conference games. Those are the games where Duke plays Kentucky, and then we kind of have a barometer for the ACC and the SEC. Now that's just one game, right? Kentucky will also play Louisville, and Clemson will play South Carolina. So like a few more of these games will exist, but it's not like the ACC and the SEC each play 2 or 3 teams from the other conference to really get an idea. So when we're outranking the teams when it's tournament time and you've got, let's say, like NC State is trying to get in and Missouri is trying to get in, they haven't played each other, but they have both played opponents who have played each other. Now it's getting really hard to parse that. It's going to be even harder this year. So yeah, an expanded tournament, I think, at least lets us get rid of that argument for like who's the 64th, 65th best team, because now we're going to know even less than we do normally.
Arguing over who's number 129 is a lot easier and a lot less relevant than arguing over who's 65th. So good call.
Seth Greenberg will still get worked up about it, though. We know that.
Someone will argue with it. It's an easy argument to make. You may be wrong, but you can still make it. But I will say this to summarize, to wrap up everything. When it comes to this tournament, no matter whether it's 64, 96, 128 teams, I look for the conferences and the teams to call for this, and I'll be interested to see if they actually do it. Whenever Selection Sunday happens, that there will be a 2-week mandatory quarantine of some sort for every team in the NCAA tournament before games actually happen, and that it's not Sunday and then games start on Tuesday. It's going to be Sunday, and then everyone enters this battle of the bubble. But they do it the way the NBA did it, where they give some time to make sure everyone is clear, everyone tests out correctly, and then the games will proceed. But we will leave that topic for another day. This concludes episode number 228 of the DBR podcast. Again, thank you very much to David Shumate for joining us. It was a great conversation we had with him earlier in the show. And for my colleagues, Sam and Jason, thank you guys so much. For those of you out there, remember, subscribe. Send us emails if you have questions or comments, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. And we will be back sometime next week to preview the start of the football season against Notre Dame. Until then, may the Duke Band take us home.